Don't know, the Bronx District Attorney Robert Johnson was elected in 1989. He is the first African-American district attorney in New York State and the longest seated as of present. He is also emphasizing, he emphasizes prosecution of serious crimes, but also not just prosecution of crimes. He deals with community outreach, drug rehabilitation, and other programs that affect victims and help victims out. And District Attorney Johnson, good to have you back here on Perspective.
It's good to see you again. Good to be here.
Glad to have you. Here we're talking a little bit today about the gun buyback program that's coming, and it's very familiar through your office. Let's talk a little bit about gun buyback. And first of all, let's talk about guns in general. We're seeing a larger number of guns out there on the streets.
Well, we're certainly seeing more shooting incidents. We've been very, very fortunate over the last 19 years or so, in which time we've seen homicides continually decline, and they're declining again this year, 41% lower than last year. But at the same time, people are still shooting more of each other. So that's a concern, and it's been a concern of mine since my very, very first moment as district attorney. I understand the power of a loaded weapon. I think we all understand that. A small child can understand what it can do to someone, and we need to do everything we can to control that kind of violence.
When you talk about guns being on the streets, we know that the average number of firearm thefts that occur in the United States every year is about 341,000, and $18 million is the amount the NRA has contributed to congressional campaigns in the last 4 years. We know the NRA has come under criticism for its contribution in the political realm, but one number that you want to take particular note of, 85% of gun crimes in New York City are committed with guns from states that have quote-unquote weak gun laws. Talk about that.
It is a concern. It should be a concern of all of us, not just here in the city where it's happening, but all over the nation. I mean, there's no reason for that. You know, the NRA talks about hunting, and a lot of the weapons that end up on the streets of the inner city are not designed for that purpose at all. They're not licensed. People who are purchasing them are not checked to the proper extent. And states like Virginia and some of the other southern states just have not exercised the kind of control that we like to see. We've had a couple of major investigations in which we had undercovers purchasing guns in states like Florida and Virginia that were destined for the streets right here in the Bronx. There's no reason for that in this day and age. We should be able to make background checks, make sure people are mentally stable. Sure, that there are times when people need protection. They're in industries where they carry large sums of money. Right here in the city, the police department regulates the licensing of firearms, but they do it in a way that they make sure that these are stable people who are in a business where it's a need for it, rather than someone who is just flying under the radar, so to speak, and nobody knows who they are, ending up with a deadly weapon in their hands.
Let's talk about the prosecutorial consequences, if you will, for those persons who do have handguns. What is the range for those persons that can be convicted for just having a gun?
Well, this is one of the things, when I said this is something that concerned me for the first minute, when I was elected 20 years ago, we had a law that said it was mandatory that you get a year in jail, but it had a loophole. And as long as a judge said the words unduly harsh, or special circumstance, I forget what the other one is, but as long as those words were mouthed, it could fit into the exception. And we tried to appeal, and we were unable to do that. So there were people with no business with a gun, with a so-called mandatory 1 year, that never got a day in jail. Now that loophole has been tightened up. The law requires 3.5 years in jail. I mean, obviously there are circumstances where, with the consent of the district attorney, you can plead down. But even when we do that, generally we're pleading down to jail time, because very seldom does someone apprehended on the streets with a gun that's not licensed that can explain why they had that gun and what lawful purpose they could be for them to possess that. It's an instrument of death, and we treat it like that. We don't want to wait until someone is murdered with the gun. We want to get the gun off the street, and we want to prosecute.
And we hear that number 3.5 years, especially nowadays, especially here in New York, talking about Plaxico Burress and the possibility of what he faces in a 3.5-year possible sentence, looking at that. Talk to me about the gun buyback program now, because now we know about the number of guns on the streets. We know the things that are out there. But let's talk about this program. Why?
Well, I think we all know what the district attorney does in terms of prosecution. We have to do that. Somebody gets caught with a gun, somebody shoots somebody, we prosecute them. But we can do more than that. We shouldn't be sitting back and waiting until the crime occurs. And that's why I was so pleased. The police department has done this. This is now, I think, the 6th or 7th program in the city. The Bronx is the last, but I think we're going to benefit from what's happened in all the other counties. We now know how to do it. We've added our own touch to it. And so what's going to happen on this Saturday, April 25th, from 11 in the morning until 5 in the evening, guns are going to be bought at 6 churches here in the Bronx. The police department has found safe locations, 6 churches. People should feel comfortable coming to a church. It's going to be done anonymously. We're not looking to ask questions of people who turn in the guns. And if you turn in an operable handgun, you're going to be given a cash card worth $200. And if you have more than one gun, you're going to get an additional $200 up to $600. The maximum is $600. But we want to get the guns off the street. It's not about prosecuting on Saturday. It's about trying to make sure that each one of these violent firearms is not used again in a crime that causes somebody harm. And we've tried a number of ways to get the word out. We've sent notices to the media. We had an announcement with the police department. Yesterday, we were very fortunate to get the support of Fernando Mateo and Hispanics across America. He also brought Ramon Murphy and the Bodegueros here in the Bronx, came and stood with us, and the Federation of Taxi Drivers and Jose Villarilla came and stood with us. These are people who face that violence, people who are working in bodegas and driving cabs. They want the guns off the street.
And while we're talking, you're seeing some of the names of the churches that you're going to see right there. If you have a handgun or a gun, and there's a safe drop-off location, we want to give you the names of these churches once again as you see them here on the screen. The first one is Immaculate Conception Roman Catholic Church on Melrose Avenue in the Bronx, between 150th Street and 151st Street. The second church, Miracle Revival Temple, 1555 McCombs Road in the Bronx. That's between West Mount Eden Avenue and Goebel Place. Third, Immaculate Conception Church, 754 East Gun Hill Road. That's between Holland Avenue and Capuchin Way. And the rest of those churches you'll be able to see in a little bit later on, as we'll continue to bring you some of those safe places that you can come and literally drop off a gun for the gun buyback program. Questions asked. A lot of critics say, listen, why are you giving money, in essence, to take guns off of the street? Why not offer gun amnesty?
Well, this is in effect gun amnesty, because when you turn in the gun, there's not being a question asked. So we're not going to prosecute you. We're not looking. And even if a gun is connected to a crime later, we won't know who turned it in. So we're going to have to investigate that crime separately. So the thing is that we want the gun off the street. Amnesty itself might encourage some people. Yes, I'm telling you now, no one's being prosecuted because we're not going to know who's turning in which gun. But money's an additional incentive, and we found that works, that motivates people. In the other counties, thousands of guns have been turned in. So the police department and my office have started out by putting in the pot $70,000 each. And we're going to back this up. We don't want guns to kill people, and we think that's worth that. You know, $200, to me, if that gun does not take a life, it's well worth it. It's money well spent. Let's
talk about some more numbers here. Federal officials say there's about 5,913 guns that were recovered by law enforcement officers in the city's 5 boroughs last year. That number's down compared to a little bit over 7,000 in the previous year, and more than half of those were traced to an original purchaser. NewYorkTimes.com reports there. There's another thing I want to ask you about, because I got this thing in front of me here. 45% of Americans say that companies manufacturing guns with no hunting or sporting purpose should be held financially and criminally responsible when these guns injure or kill. Agree? Disagree?
Well, it's a difficult question. You know, these guns have been used by licensed individuals. So their argument is, you know, we're purchasing them. People are using them for protection. There are a lot of states where it's not a problem to have it in the home. So that's their argument. In fact, that case has been made in the civil arena. I'm not a civil lawyer, but I know that case has been made, and I think it's been made unsuccessfully. So we have to first go after the people we know are not supposed to have them. Yes, if we could some way find a way to control the stream of the guns, that would be a good thing. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to control where it's going and lessen the stream, really narrow the stream down in the first instance. I don't know if we're ever going to get to the point where we can say you can't manufacture that gun, you can't sell that gun. I don't know that we're going to win that argument in a court of law.
All right. Well, we'll take a quick break.